Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Noah Mintz, and I'm the event coordinator at the bookstore, and I'm thrilled today to welcome Diane Cook and Emily Temple in celebration of the paperback launch of their books, The New Wilderness and The Lightness, respectively. While the pandemic has taken a toll on all of our lives, events like the one that you're about to see have become bright spots in our days, and I want to give a special thanks to our guests for joining us this evening. So, to some housekeeping, you should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button here at the bottom of your screen to submit them. We'll be asking those at the end of the program, so please don't be shy. There's also a chat button through which I'll be posting a link to buy tonight's books, very important. Another caveat for tonight's event, we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections and server loads, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise. We'll try to solve them as quickly as possible. And we've scheduled a whole host of summer programming for you. So head over to our website and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out in particular is next Monday, June 28th. We're thrilled to welcome Rachel Cusk for her only live US appearance in support of her novel, Second Place, in conversation with McKenna Goodman. That program is up on our website now and taking registrations. And finally, we've enabled Zoom's auto-transcribe setting. So if your version of Zoom is up to date, hit the live transcription button at the bottom of your screen to enable that, and you'll see closed captions. So now a little about tonight's guests, and we'll get started. Diane Cook is the author of the novel The New Wilderness and the story collection Man vs. Nature, which was a finalist for the Guardian First Book Award, the Believer Book Award, and the Los Angeles Times Art Seidenbaum Award for first fiction. Her writing has appeared in Harper's, Tin House, Granta, and other publications, and her stories have been included in the anthologies Best American Short Stories and the O. Henry Prize Stories. She is a former producer for the radio program This American Life and was the recipient of a 2016 fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. She lives in Brooklyn, New York with her husband, daughter, and son. Emily Temple was born in Syracuse, New York. She earned a BA from Middlebury College and an MFA in fiction from the University of Virginia, where she was the recipient of a Henfield Prize. She now lives in Brooklyn, where she is managing editor at Literary Hub. The Lightness is her first novel. Now, without any further ado, I will hand it off to you two, Emily and Diane. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yes, welcome.
Emily, thanks for talking with me about your book and my book.
Same.
We were going to start off with a couple readings and then just kind of jump into talking about the ways that our books talk to each other, and then also just ourselves as writers. So hopefully that'll be fun for everybody.
Just some, writer on writer chat.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so I think we said I would start. I'm going to start. So this is just a little bit, I chose a part that I've never read out loud before, so please bear with me, but we've entered the time of chaotic reading where I'm just gonna try stuff. And if for anyone who hasn't read the book, I think all you need to know for this part is that the narrator's mother crafts these enormous women out of clay in her garage. And it's that's her art. And then the narrator is at a meditation summer, and she's working in the garden with this hot guy named Luke, who she wants to tell stuff to and impress him. So that's it. I think it's going to be understanding. It's going to be understanding. That's what I said. I think it will be comprehensible. All right. Here we go. Often when I was a child, I would sneak into my mother's studio to commune with the mournful fatties. That's what they're called. No part of their bodies was left to the ecstatic imagination. My mother found her ecstasy in overflow, not obscuration. This is an essential thing to understand about her. My favorite fatty was an old one whom I couldn't remember my mother making. She had always just been there. She was the ugliest of the bunch, her face like an imploding planet, her large breasts hanging almost to her crotch, her hands gnarled and monstrous, her kneecaps misaligned. I named her Beth, and when I was very young, I would sit on the garage floor between those massive feet and tell her stories, bring her tiny treasures I'd found. Shells, beads, Jolly Rancher wrappers. Beth liked that sort of thing. Later, I tucked one of my favorite plastic ponies, the Palomino, dearly beloved, between 2 rolls of Beth's cold, cracked flesh, a gift. Beth was my first refuge when my parents would argue, my mother's voice rising like steam into my bedroom, my father's an imperceptible murmur, or when I was home alone and afraid, seeing eyes in all the corners. I liked to rub Beth's flabby butt. You can probably see this small circle I wore down with my rubbing. I liked to see how much of my face I could fit into her massive hand. But when I began to become aware of my body and the ways it should and should not look, I stopped going to the garage. I became afraid of the fatties, as if their grotesquerie might somehow be contagious. I thought that if I loved Beth, there was some chance I would become her. This is a logical fallacy to which I have willingly subscribed for many years. Does beauty in the end hurt us? My mother used to ask idly as she smoothed the contours of a bulbous face or packed a massive clay hump onto a shoulder or groin. I admit, until that summer, I never considered the answer. Studies have shown that the act of looking at something attractive, a person, a product, some honest to goodness nature, triggers an involuntary series of synapse firings in the motor cerebellum. As it turns out, this is the exact same neural sequence that causes us to reach out a hand. Beauty then literally moves us. We all know this. Beauty can easily force a hand. But will we ever shake the pressing delusion, as Tolstoy put it, that beauty is the same as goodness? After all, how often does goodness truly force a hand? More likely it stays it, and even then barely, and even then only for a time. Here's the story I told Luke some hot day in the garden. Once my father took me with him on one of his trips. I don't remember the drive or the monastery or the exact purpose of the ceremony we attended, but I do remember that it too was high up in the mountains, maybe even higher than the center. My mother was out of town, or I'd never have been invited along. I wasn't supposed to be choosing after all, my unformed brain, etc. Our secret, my father said, and I bloomed. There were hundreds of people in attendance that day, faded colors, loose pants, faces turned up to an enormous statue of a meditating Buddha. The very last step in the ceremony was to paint in the eyes of the Buddha, and here the attendees were invited to participate. 2 monks on 2 ladders held 2 paintbrushes in front of the Buddha's 2 eyes, and hundreds of silk ribbons in red and gold were attached to the handle of each brush. The ends of the ribbons were distributed through the crowd to connect us to the painter, the brush, the eye, the Buddha, the infinite. A boy with brown eyes and dreadlocks gave me a ribbon, and so I held it. But as the artists lifted their brushes and the attendees raised their arms, I began to feel unsteady. My vision popped and sparkled and then began to fade, edges first. I tugged on my ribbon, which had turned wet and dark in my palm. "Daddy," I said, "I can't see." I felt rather than saw his face turn to mine, or perhaps that's not exact. I could see the outline of his head clearly, his hair and ears glowing and distinct in a halo of afternoon light, but between them, where his features should have been, my dimming vision registered only a kind of bottomless pulsing blackness. The empty-faced shape knelt beside me, wholly unknowable, wholly unknowable. "You need water," it said. It was at that moment that I fainted. I didn't see what kind of scene I caused, maybe no scene at all. Everyone's eyes were focused upwards, not the girl on the ground. Isn't that always the way? When I woke, I was propped up on my father's knee. I could see his face again, right where it was supposed to be, between his ears, and above him, I could see the looming face of the statue, its drying eyes clear and unconcerned. "You gave your sight to the Buddha," he said. He patted my sweaty forehead. "Very generous of you." Later, he bought me an ice cream sundae and a t-shirt from the monastery gift shop to commemorate the miraculous occasion. As an afterthought, he also bought me a small canteen to remind me to hydrate properly in high places. He told everyone we met what had happened, squeezing my small shoulders, beaming down at me. They all thought it was amazing, simply amazing. I even received a bouquet of wildflowers and a kiss on the cheek from the dreadlocked boy. He had a large gap between his 2 front teeth, the kind that made you want to put something in there. Luke liked this story, as I knew he would. He pressed me for details. He agreed that it was generous. He agreed that it was amazing. "There's something special about you," he said. "That much is clear." He hugged me again, slipping his hand under my t-shirt in a way that might have been utterly unintentional and might have been a declaration. When he let go, I scanned his face for the answer, but he showed no sign, or the sign was too obscure, or I had invented it entirely. I didn't tell Luke that the fight my parents had after we returned from that trip was worse than any before. I remember it like this. I lost consciousness, and when I regained it, my father moved out. There must have been time between the two, but in my memory, he doesn't even unpack. We drive away from the lap of the giant Buddha, and when we get to our house, he simply drops me off and keeps going. Still, I had thought that trip was the start of something as well as the end, our secret. I thought there was something we shared, but he never invited me along again. Related, perhaps. Once I found my mother lying in her bed, fully clothed, alone, the sheets black with her hair. When I asked her what she was doing, she raised an arm into the air. Your father, she said, is a beautiful vessel. I waited. After a while, she raised the other arm as if hoping to be lifted from the sheets by an enormous mother of her own. But there's a hole in the bottom, she said. Okay, stop.
Thank you. I love that image of her wanting to be lifted up by her own mother or by a mother of her own. It's beautiful.
That's something that's hard to learn about your mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I spent a whole book trying to get to.
Yeah,
which is something we're going to talk about.
We're going to talk about it.
We are. I'm going to read a little bit. I have never read this either, and we didn't even plan that. But I'm going to read a little bit. I think of this book. I don't know if many people think of this book as a coming of age like story, but I do. The New Wilderness. So I'm going to read a part that is like very much in keeping with that. So Agnes is this little girl. She lives in the middle of this wilderness as a nomadic hunter-gatherer and of the future. So that's the premise of the book. And at some point, and I'm giving something away, but it's okay because you should have read it by now. At some point, a new crop of people comes in and joins their group. And in that crop of people is a boy named Jake. And Agnes feels very attracted to Jake. And they have a sweet, sweet romance. And Agnes is very much the dom. She is just a different kind of person in the world. So I'm going to read a little bit from a couple spots where it's, she's taking charge of the narrative. Agnes softened sinew in her mouth as she watched Jake stitching pieces of hide together. He was making a patchwork buckskin blanket. His fingers were white from the force needed to pull the bone, needle, and sinew through. His hands were fully calloused. When he touched Agnes, his fingertips were as rough as dried seed pods. He said he could barely feel her skin against them, so he would sometimes trace his cheek or the tip of his nose, the inside of his wrist along her skin. Something more sensitive. He was her life mate. They had decided. They would make a family and rear their young, and then at an age when it seemed their young could take care of themselves, they would send them away to find their own land to explore. And then they'd have more young. What age were you thinking? Jake had asked. I think probably by 6 they can be on their own, said Agnes. And Jake paled. What? You don't agree? She absorbed his silence, studied the incredulous look on his face. I guess I could be convinced to wait till 7 or 8. Agnes, that is way too young. And now she felt incredulous. Bears do it at 2. Why can't our babies? Because we're not bears. Our babies will be better than bears. Though she wondered if anything could truly be better than bears. Weren't you about 6 when you came here? 5, I think. I don't remember. Think about when you were that young. Would you have wanted to be on your own, finding your own food, defending against predators, you at 5 or 6 alone in the wilderness? When Agnes first got here, of course she had been useless in the wilderness, but that was because she was from the city. She knew beds and clean plates. She knew toilets. She knew about the predators in the city, but they were a different kind of predator, and it was a different kind of danger. She had needed time to adjust and learn this new place, but she believed that by the following spring, she had developed the abilities and skills needed to lead the community, if anyone would have let her. She knew then almost everything she knew now about living there. The things she didn't understand well were people, and that hadn't changed much. But surviving, she understood that. It had been one of the first things she understood. Really, what else was there? Hunting, processing, tracking, water source, basic clothing and shelter, weather, the different gifts and threats from flora and fauna. Being alone on a stormy night, being alone when you knew a big cat was nearby, being alone when you heard footsteps and didn't know what they belonged to. Those things were hard at any age. But a 6-year-old possesses logic. They can think themselves out of fear if they have to, and if they're left alone to. Her mother had left her when she was maybe 10, 11, 12. That had been very hard, but not because of survival preparedness. And if the whole community had left her, she would have been sad, but she still would have survived. What did age matter? I don't know, she said. Jake still stared at her with doubt. Well, what age were you thinking? She asked. 16, 17, or whatever is legal. Legal? What's that? I'm going to jump ahead. She's like totally out of civilization, so she doesn't even know really what laws are. I'm going to jump ahead to this other moment when, so she's talking a little bit up there about like, you know, she wants to be in charge, but she's not able to yet. And this is one of the scenes, one of the first times that she really feels like she's taking charge of the group and is essential. They're walking on this big long march to find water, and they end up walking with like all the different creatures of the wilderness, almost like those water migrations that you see in like nature documentaries where you zoom up and every like animal is in a trail. That's what they're a part of, but they're the humans too. And she's leading. Looking across the vast plain and seeing all the animals moving as one in one direction with the same needs, she felt a part of the place in a way she hadn't before. She'd never realized she felt apart from it, but she guessed she had in some unknowable way. It was their reliance on the water spigots, on the maps, on the fact that they checked in with rangers. They were never fully living on their own, not like these animals were every day, not until now. And she was leading. She thought about a conversation she'd had with Jake when he'd first arrived, when he'd asked how long she thought she would be staying. He had no concept that the wilderness state would be forever, having just arrived bewildered. But she never considered they would leave. When they'd left the city, her mother hadn't called it a trip or an adventure or something temporary. She had said, "This is our new home." At the thought of leaving here, her breath caught in her throat. She felt like that small girl again, listless and coughing, turning a handkerchief red with her own blood, unable to assert force on the world. But that was no longer her. She was no longer that small girl curiously watching from a distance, from behind her mother or behind Glenn, tentatively reaching out to touch a wet deer nose, breaking through a spider's new morning web, wiping dew and silk from her face with surprise. Now she was the head elk, the point of the V, the dominant doe. She was a part of it all, and it all depended on her. Agnes sprinted ahead. She heard Val call for her to wait. Glenn croaked for her to slow down. Her mother ordered her to stop, but she whooped in response and ran faster. She spooked the deer, which veered away. The geese above got smaller as they rose to retreat from such ecstasy. This was the last breath of that little girl. Agnes grinned. She did a cartwheel and whooped again. If she'd had something in her hands to dig deep into the dirt with, she would have buried her younger self. Instead, she made squishing sounds as she pretended to dig around in her own guts. Then she dramatically pantomimed pulling something out of her, the heart of that little girl, and with one last whoop, she threw it up into the geese, and they honked and veered off again, raining shit down around her. And then Agnes waited for the others to catch up. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you. The big triumph.
I love Agnes, and I love the way she calls her future children her young.
She's an animal. She's like a little animal.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a feat of characterization. Just so everyone knows, this is going to be like Real Appreciation Society time. It's such a feat of characterization because you create this like wolf girl essentially in this very convincing way. And at first it's not as clear because everyone else is sort of part of the same group. And then when we really understand as she gets older and we see these new people and their interactions with her. I mean, Jake with his hair, like, you know. But I'm interested in, it's at least half a coming of age story. And you said you didn't think like people haven't received it that way?
Oh, I mean, maybe they have. I don't think it's like the thing that gets the most attention if people talk about it. You know, it seems like it's a climate change book, it's an eco book, it's a book about mothers and daughters, and it is all of those things, or dystopian, or like speculative. And it's funny, I think some people read it more as a story about the mom, even though Agnes, and it is, but Agnes takes over the narrative like at least a third of the way through, and finishes, takes us the whole way through. I don't know why, but I think it's just not the thing that people focus on as like the grand idea of the book, and which is fair because I don't think that's the grand idea, but it's a major one,
Yeah. I always suspect when people like don't talk about plot elements that happen like more than 30 pages in that they won't know the first time.
Yeah.
I did hear
so they're at a camp.
Yeah, they're in the woods. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, I mean, just the switch to Agnes, I'm going to connect it to your short stories too, which like are very much in a way, many of them like mini, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, I'm sure this has been written down somewhere and I'm stealing it, but are like mini apocalypses. And that's how it feels in these shifts too. It's like you have an apocalypse in this book and then it's like you totally reset and you rewrite all the rules. And then you almost have like it's almost a new book. It's like, it would be like a new season of the show of the book. And that was so elegant and so like for a book to just continually reinvent itself as you go along. I found that so satisfying. I guess if I'm going to make this a question, the question is going to be, did you always know from the beginning, did you always know there was going to be the different perspectives? Was this always the plan? Did you blow it up and decide?
I kind of blew it up. I had this desire to make both of their voices heard. So B is the mother and Agnes is the daughter. And I think the original idea was like to weave them through one another so that like, a thing that we're getting from B, we would then get from Agnes, and then, it would continue that way. But that didn't feel very satisfying. And I never like got to Agnes's part. Like I just couldn't get to her. I was really kind of happily trapped in B's voice when I was writing. But I knew, and I came up with like all these really dumb ways to be tricky, like I was like by the end of the book, it was going to be like, haha, it was Agnes all along. You thought it was B. It was really Agnes telling B's story. And I was just like, no, I can't do that. And I just finally had to like put the book aside and tell myself that I needed to just get to know Agnes a little bit, because otherwise, like, I wasn't going to let her in. You know what I mean? Like, you just get like you just get so stuck in a voice or stuck in a reality that it's almost scary to break out of it. So I opened a new document. I called it an experiment. I just labeled it Agnes experiment. And I started writing her. And then I never went back. Like I didn't then return to B, because now I was happily trapped with Agnes. And then that made sense to me for it to become Agnes's book, because there's this idea of like passing on, stories, or just passing on what it is to be women from like one mother to another. So that made sense to me. So it was like I knew it needed to happen, but I couldn't do it for a really long time. And I convinced myself of all sorts of things to get out of having to do it, until I just had to face it and go there.
It's annoying to know you have to do a lot of work. And then
it was a lot of work. And like weirdly scary. I mean, it's funny to talk about writing as something that can be scary sometimes, but it can be. There's like always the idea in my mind of like, well, writing's a series of decisions that you make, because like you have like infinite number of like directions it could go, and infinite ways a character could be, and they could respond in certain ways that would just like slightly shift the narrative, like, in some other new direction. It's like the theory of multiple worlds or something. And like I sometimes when I get paralyzed by something, it's because I think, well, what if I make the wrong decision? Like I can write a sentence, I can like be clear, like I can get from point A to point B and tell a story, but what if I've made the wrong decision about a character, about a thing that happens, and it's sent the book to a place that it shouldn't go? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you have like multiple drafts? Because the way that I do it is I'm like, I'll just try it, and then I will like label a new draft, like the one where she dies, and just try it. And then I've got the old one where I can like go back. I like try to make a new draft at the point of no return.
I should try that. I have like all of these like crazy like half formed paragraphs in like all of these different other pages, and those are my what ifs or my others. I think I'm not like that I think that is a brave thing, and I haven't gotten to that point yet. I think I've rewritten things, I've like rewritten the ending, or I rewrote, whatever. I like wrote a whole section of the book that I scrapped, but I don't think that I've really like put a dartboard up and like, or like thrown a dart and been like, now I'm going to make her do this, or now I'm going to make, this thing happen. But I think I should. That feels very brave. Is that how you got to like getting Olivia to tell her story? Or is that how you got to some kind of, like, how did you break open your book? Or did you always know?
I never broke it up. I still don't know what it's about. I always knew that it was going to be her voice. And I always knew that she was, well, no, actually, this is not true. At the very beginning, when I was writing this book, which for those who haven't read it is like all told in the first person from an adult narrator, sort of looking back at like this one summer. It took me a little while to figure out what the right stance was going to be, because it actually began with like a contemporary voice at this meditation center. And then there was going to be this like girl from 100 years before who had like left clues. And then I was like, no, like that, that's like crazy. And so then it was going to be Olivia, a contemporary, like a 16-year-old narrator, and then also the like 35-year-old Olivia. And that was going to be the two different voices. And then I was like, no, like this is also too much, because I wanted to include all this backstory about her family, which is like mostly what I read from. And so it just ended up having to be that I gave up this idea of like, I wanted her to be too smart than I thought she was going to be able to be at that age and in that situation. So I just settled on her basically being an adult looking back. And no 100-year-old like mystery, which I still think would have been fun.
There's still a mystery, a pretty big one. Or you get the sense that the mystery is 100 years old, even if it's happened in her lifetime. There's this like forever quality about it.
Yeah, there's still an ancient mystery of like physics
and religion.
Yeah.
I loved her. I was gonna say the sing and I had it and now it's gone. I love looking at it from her perspective down the road, because there are always these moments where she comes back and says, of course I know now that, X, Y, or Z. And I find that so kind of delicious when reading a story. I mean, I know there's something great about being in a moment with a character experiencing it for the first time and it's all new, and the narrator can give you other interesting tidbits, but I love the structure of someone older looking back and having the story change. Like it's like you sense her trying to write it or tell it in the way it happened, but she can't anymore. And I think that the layers in the lightness of that happening are just really exciting, and they they break it open for me. I know you never broke up in the story, but like that, it really just like, it makes me feel so wobbly. And I love that feeling when I'm reading.
Thanks.
There's no question there, but
no, I mean, yeah, it's true. But that's like, for me, that's also how I like experience thought, where I have the narrative, we like have the experiential self and the narrative self, right? And it's like you go through, you do whatever, and then when you tell yourself the story of it, it changes, even if you're not trying to change it. And then also when you really are trying to change it, I'm like, that was fine that I did that. Right? Because like it was fine. But in a way, she's kind of the opposite of Agnes, who is like, you're in the moment and she is capable of telling you what's going on, and also of like skinning things.
Yeah, well, it's like the difference between an unreliable narrator and what a reliable one. Is there any such thing? Probably not. But like someone who doesn't have all the pieces, and someone who has enough of the pieces to be able to enough of the pieces where you do trust her, whether, I mean, I don't know if I was supposed to not, trust Olivia's take and her authority, but I totally did.
Yeah, people said she was unreliable, and I was like, she's doing her best.
I know. God, guys.
God, it's rude.
Do you know everything? No. Okay. I especially love, so I told you, we met earlier today, everybody, to talk about like, how we were gonna approach tonight. And I told Emily, there's one thing that I definitely want to talk to you about. So I'm just gonna jump to it because it's sort of related. This idea that like, so she's an older person telling the story. And so she has this wisdom that she didn't have before. And I think one of the parts of the book that was just like, I just had to stop and really let it wash over me was toward the end. And I wish I'd written it down, or I wish I had it here. Olivia is like talking, she's kind of wrapping up the whole narrative of everything that had happened. And she's talking about her parents. And throughout the book, her mother's like a total monster. And you see her as a monster through her eyes. And she's kind of on this quest to find her father. And so you feel like her father's very important. And then at the end, she tells you kind of what happened with them and what happened. Like she found her father. He was exactly who you would have imagined, like not a great person. And the mother and their relationship kind of evolved in this way. And she has this beautiful line about parental love, or a couple of lines about parental love. And the idea being that like, I always thought I loved my dad more, but it turned out, I loved my mom more because she was awful, but she was there, she was like a physical thing and she wasn't absent. And I'd never understood that. I mean, I'm like super paraphrasing right now, but I like, please don't think that this is how it's written. I never understood that is love, and I was totally knocked down by that, in part because I felt like I had written an entire book trying to get to that idea, or to try and like break open this mother-daughter relationship that I find so hard and confusing and satisfying and all the things. And then I felt like that in that line, you just like laid out exactly what the conflict is. Just the hardness and the trickery of love. And that sometimes it doesn't feel good. And so I was wondering, did you always know that when you were writing the book? Is that something that you just understood about this kind of relationship? Or did you write yourself into that knowledge, like through Olivia? I mean, like, did Olivia always, which obviously Olivia didn't always know that, but like as the author, did you always kind of know that that's where she was going to end up?
No, I learned it. I mean, it was like a book about her finding her father, and there used to be a lot more. There was a lot more physical searching for him, and it used to be like that was always, that was my idea, and I don't think it really ended up being in the end the case, but that was like the thrust where she was like looking, and it was a quest, and it was, and then the book kind of taught me. Because I kept writing this stuff about her mom and, sort of the difference between the elusive and appealing and like magical father who is not really there, who's always gone, and the mother who pulls her hair and, yells at her and is like bursting with life in this way that it is encroaching. Mm-hmm. I basically, like, when I wrote that line, realized it.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. Did you feel so, like, did you feel like a ghostly miracle when you got to that?
Yes, because I mean, because like, you know, I think one of the hard things to realize for me, the human, and this, like, I want to say, ask you about this too, is like, it's only been in the last 10 years of my life that I have understood that my parents are humans and that they like have their own personalities and foibles and, you know, everything that I have, and that they have like the same level of emotional complexity that I have, which, like, you know, it sounds so dumb because of course they do, but it's like, you know, the feeling you have when you see your teacher at the supermarket and you're like, you eat? I thought you lived in the classroom. And, you know, there's some point where you see that your parents are just people. Mm-hmm. And so that has been, in a way, like, even though I sort of had already known it, writing up to that point helps me think about that too. Because I was just like, oh, like, these people are people, you know? And one of the things that I love about B is that you sort of do this thing that, like, that like seems kind of edgy to me, which is that you let her be a whole person. And she's not like you don't, the book doesn't come down on whether she's a good mother or a bad mother or try to make any claim about it, which I feel like would be really tempting. Mm-hmm. Somehow, you know, especially because you end with Agnes, who could make the same kind of declaration. Basically, mm-hmm. I feel like you do answer, you do say the same thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, did you, like, that, this is also not a question, but like, how did you think about that? Like, because it is so, it's almost like taboo to have a woman with a child being driven by her own urges, yeah, in a way that's not like pristinely in line with the child's interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was like one of the main things that I wanted to tackle in the book, or that, so when I read that part of your book, I was wondering, like, does Emily write to discover something? Like, does she start a project because there are tons of questions for her? Does she start a project because, you know, she has these ideas or thoughts that she wants to tell a particular story? I definitely had these questions in my mind, and they like definitely had to do with me. You know,
I don't do anything.
I'm not any of the characters, but, you know, I think I had this, I didn't have kids yet. Now I have 2 kids. When I started the book, I didn't have any. And I was really like thinking about how do you be a whole person if you're a mother? Like, I just didn't, and my mother died a while ago. And so I didn't have her to like knock around this idea with, or even to like get the down and dirty information now that like I'm an adult, that I could say, like, did you hate it? You know, like, did you, like, what was the hard part? Were there times when you wished you hadn't done it? Like, I wanted all of it, you know, like wanted everything she could give me. And so I just had to write a character that I love. You know, I love B, even though she's very complicated. I needed to write a character and give a character the ability to be a selfish mom. And I don't even like I'm like kind of air quoting that. I needed to know that you could be a mother and still love yourself, you know, like, or care for yourself. And that even if she makes the ultimate sacrifice, and it's like, it's a speculative, like, futuristic novel. So it can really like, I can really like push it to the very, very, very extreme of that idea. She does all that, and then she needs something. She realizes that that can't make her happy, and that she has to, something else has to be for her to be happy. Like she needs that. People need that. Mothers need that. Everybody needs that. You have to be able to be a whole person. And so that was like the kind of the experiment and the big question for myself in starting it, or writing her, was just like, can I write a mother who is a real person and makes decisions that are very uncomfortable for people and doesn't necessarily apologize for it either? I mean, that's like part of who she is. She's deeply flawed, and oh God, she gave me hope, I guess, if that makes sense. Because I knew that I could still be a person and be a mom too. I mean, it's like, I didn't have kids because I wrote this book and like convinced myself that it would be okay, but I just had to like work out some things, and I wanted there to be a mother who felt more like the kind of person I worried that I would be, you know what I mean? And then find at the end of the book that she's okay too. You know what I mean? Like that everything's okay.
Did anything change? Because were you still drafting when you had your first child? Mm-hmm. And so did anything change? Like, were you like, I must rewrite? And were you like, I was correct? Like, this is right. Like, did you just?
I think, well, it changed. I think it changed like the depth of it, or maybe the tenor. Maybe it gave Agnes a lot more than she would have had. Because when I started writing, I was writing it from the perspective of a daughter. So I was like trying to embody a mother, you know, who, and try and fill in these blanks that I couldn't fill in by actually just like talking to my own, or talking to that like family lineage thing. You know, I can talk to friends who are moms, but that wasn't the thing I was like trying to get at. And then when I had a daughter first, and suddenly like I was the mom, so it just like flipped everything. It didn't change. I knew the story was still being Agnes, and they were still going to do the same things that they were doing, and I'd already like cracked Agnes's voice by that point, but it just like let me like make a sphere instead of like whatever the flatter version of that would be.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know. So it just gave me more, I guess. But I was really grateful for a girl at that point. You know what I mean? I mean, I have a son also, and he's great, but I just think in that moment, it was really, really helpful that it was a daughter.
My mom told me once that I was both the best and the worst thing that ever happened to her.
Oh, that's amazing.
Like, that seems right.
How old were you when she said that?
I don't know. Actually, I think it was pretty recently, so I could take it.
Okay, good.
I think I was an adult. I wasn't like 10.
That's good. That's good. I have thought about this a lot. Like this like moment when honesty goes from being hurtful to helpful. You know what I mean? Like when like I wanted to know every dirty thing my mom ever thought, but I certainly didn't want to know it, you know, before I was, you know, whatever age.
Yeah.
You know, there's some questions. Should we jump to some questions?
Yeah. Yes. I was just saying it feels like it was time flew.
Time flew.
I have so many other things to say. Okay. But let's look at the questions.
Okay. Emily, this first one is for you. Do you want?
Have I yet found the perfect sentence? And if so, who wrote it? Wow. No, of course not. There are so many good sentences out there. There is a good book on sentences that is eluding me right now. But the sentence that comes to mind at that question is, was written by, oh my God, I'm being terrible. It was written by Helen Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an anti-death day, semicolon, the crocuses.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good sentence.
Did you say semicolon?
Yeah, semicolon.
Wow.
She doesn't write semicolon. It was an anti-death day.
Right.
Crocuses.
Forget that.
I thought that was a good one.
That's a good one. That's like, I don't even understand it. It's so good.
I know. It's so good that I wrote it down in my notebook and I forgot about it. And then I was like, Virginia Woolf must have written this. And then I put it into my own book and I attributed it to Virginia Woolf. And then I was like, fact checked it. And then I was like, no, like, of course, Helen Phillips.
That's amazing.
Anyway, the whole thing out. Oh, next one.
What surprised you the most in the process of writing these books? Do you have something like that?
I don't know what surprised me the most. Oh, how many times I thought it was done.
Yeah.
And I was wrong. That surprised me. And that I'm having a hard time dealing with that as I try to write a second book, because I write things I can just remember the number of Christmases where I was like, okay, I've got a week off from work. Like, this is it. I finished it like 3 years in a row. I was like, I'm finishing it for real this time. And now I like find it hard to even, I'm like, it doesn't matter what I write in this paragraph. It's going to get cut. Everything gets cut. So it's like, I'm like paralyzed. But what about you?
I guess like how much extra writing there was. I knew there would be, there always is with stories I write, but it was a lot. And just, oh my God, how fucking long it took. Yeah, that's just like, as someone who came from writing stories, which I always think of as these really like ecstatic experiences. Like I think and think and think and think and think and think and think. And then all of a sudden I just write it like really fast. And it's just like exciting. And the novel, like, no matter how excited I got about any part of it, it was still like, I'd look back and I would have written 2 pages, and I still had, it's a 400-page book. And there was like so many more hundreds of pages already like that I cut.
Yeah.
And it just like, it takes so much. One of the reasons people say writing a novel is hard is just because it takes so long, and you have to believe in it. Like, you have to get yourself to the end, and there's no shortcuts. There's just no way to do it fast. I mean, I know you can do it fast, but even the fast ones take forever, Mm-hmm. I think that was the most surprising thing, and like the hardest thing to kind of mentally get over.
Yeah.
For me.
It does. And I would find that I would forget things. Like, I would forget choices that I had made because it was so long ago in the drafting, and I reached a point where there was too much to like reread it all the time. But it had written some of the beginning like a year before, and I would get like a little lost. And I had to just keep reorienting myself, which I found kind of challenging.
Yeah.
Also seems like a good time for me to tell the story that I want to tell to embarrass Diane, which is that when I was in my MFA, so this is just a plug for her short story collection in addition to her novel, Man v Nature, which when I was in my MFA, writing short stories, writing weird girl short stories, and being like sneered at by the writing professor who was like, is magic interesting? And told me that the only interesting magic was like what happened at 3 a.m. in a CVS on Bleecker Street. And I was like, well,
shut up. Shut up.
Right. And I like was reading this, I was like, okay, cool. Man, like I got it. I love the cover. And so I was reading it, and I think I was about halfway through when I just was like, oh my God, I have to quit. And I threw the book across the lawn, just like as far away from me as possible, because I was just like, oh my God, this is just like, this is perfection. This is exactly what I want to write. This is like the most perfect short story that I have ever read. And I'm done. And so I almost quit. But then I just like crawled across the lawn to go get the book. This is just like absurdly good. So anyway, thank you for that.
You're
book
welcome. You're welcome.
Which I love.
I'm very glad.
And then I wrote like, I wrote something to that effect on the internet. And then I got and then I ended it with, but where's the novel? And then I got a nice email being like, it's coming. And then we were all happy.
I swear. And you know, if it hadn't been coming, I would have like just hid it under my bed for like 7 years.
I know. I didn't think about what it would have, well, like you reading that without having any like hope of a novel being like, oh God.
You must have known. You must have known deep down that it was on its way.
It felt like it was time. It had been like the amount of time where I was like, it will be happening.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of fun to see like this in 2020 there were all these people putting out books that had like kind of put out books around the time that I had put out my first book, and so it felt very nice, and like there was this like cycle that like when you put out a book, like you'll see now with your next book, you'll see some of the same names like putting out another book and another book, like if you know, like if everyone keeps writing. And it's just like a funny, weird thing that I noticed that was weird, strangely comforting, that there'd be like, we're like cicadas, I guess. Like we all like go back and like toil away in the underground, and then we like throw our books up and and then, you know, have like mad, passionate cicada love and like die and then go back underneath whatever, have our babies and go away. That seems like a good place to end it.
Publishing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, that was really nice.
Yes.
That was really nice. That was fantastic conversation, and you know, a great metaphor to end on there with cicadas.
That's cicada love.
Cicada love. Well, thank you so much to both of you again, Emily, Diane. This was really terrific. And for those of you at home, please do remember to get copies of the new Wilderness and the Lightness from our website. And we'll hope you'll join us again for another virtual event at Community very soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank you.